There's a river in Africa that has created one of the most bizarre political situations on Earth. The Congo River doesn't just separate two countries. It separates two entirely different realities. On one side, you have the Democratic Republic of Congo, a nation of 106.55 million people facing ongoing conflict from Rwanda-backed M23 rebels that has driven 7,000 civilian deaths in early 2025 alone, all while extracting 130,000 tons of cobalt annually, 68% of global output, that powers your smartphone. On the other side, the Republic of Congo, smaller but more stable, quietly extracting oil while the world watches its neighbor burn. Same colonial history, same language, same river. But why such different fates? The answer starts with just how close these two worlds actually sit. The geographic paradox that defines two nations. Picture this. You can literally throw a stone from one national capital to another. Kinshasa and Brazzaville sit just 1.5 kilometers apart across the Congo River, making them the closest capital cities anywhere on the planet. Yet these two cities govern completely separate nations with different currencies, languages of administration, legal systems, and economic policies. It's as if Manhattan and Brooklyn suddenly became capitals of different countries overnight. The Congo River itself tells this story of division perfectly. For centuries, this massive waterway served as a highway for trade, culture, and communication across Central Africa. Communities on both sides shared family ties, spoke related languages, and conducted business as naturally as breathing. The river connected rather than separated. But European colonial powers transformed this natural unifier into the ultimate political divider. What once brought people together now splits them apart with passport controls, customs checkpoints, and bureaucratic barriers. The infrastructure connecting these twin capitals reveals just how absurd this separation has become. For decades, the only way to cross between Kinshasa and Brazzaville was by ferry or small boat, despite the short distance. The long-promised bridge project that would finally connect these capitals has faced delays, funding issues, and political complications that perfectly capture the broader dysfunction of having two separate governments managing what should be a unified urban area. Daily life in this divided metropolis creates surreal situations. Family members living on opposite sides of the river need passports to visit each other for Sunday dinner. This closeness means that instability in one capital immediately affects the other, creating a shared vulnerability that separate governments struggle to manage effectively. The economic implications of this division are staggering. Two separate customs systems operate within shouting distance of each other. The Democratic Republic of Congo uses the Congolese franc, while the Republic of Congo uses the CFA franc tied to the euro. Traders moving goods between Kinshasa and Brazzaville must navigate different regulatory frameworks, tax systems, and bureaucratic procedures despite covering a distance shorter than most city bus routes. This artificial economic separation destroys potential efficiencies and creates opportunities for corruption that benefit officials on both sides. European powers carved up the Congo Basin at the 1884-85 Berlin Conference, arbitrarily using the river as a border with no local input. The river became a boundary because it looked neat on paper, not because it made sense for the people living there. Population patterns on both sides of the river highlight the dramatic differences between these nations. Kinshasa has exploded into a megacity of over 17 million people, making it one of the largest urban areas in Africa. The city grows by roughly 400,000 people every year, creating enormous pressure on infrastructure, housing, and services. Meanwhile, Brazzaville remains a more manageable 2.4 million inhabitants. This population imbalance means that Kinshasa's problems, from traffic congestion to unemployment, dwarf those of its neighbor. The view from Brazzaville shows a city that seems to be bursting at the seams with humanity, while Kinshasa looks across at a capital that appears almost sleepy by comparison. Climate change forces both nations to confront their artificial separation. The Congo River system doesn't recognize political boundaries when it floods or when rainfall patterns shift. Deforestation upstream affects downstream communities, regardless of which country they call home. Both capitals face rising temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, and environmental degradation that require coordinated responses. Water management, flood control, and environmental protection become shared challenges that separate governments struggle to address effectively. River management exemplifies this forced cooperation. The Congo River provides water, transportation, and waste disposal for both capitals, but no single authority manages these functions comprehensively. When industrial pollution from Kinshasa affects water quality in Brazzaville, diplomatic protocols must govern what should be straightforward environmental management. Fishing communities that have worked these waters for generations now navigate international regulations to pursue livelihoods that predate both modern nations. The telecommunications infrastructure reveals another layer of this geographic paradox. Mobile phone networks on both sides of the river can literally see each other's cell towers, yet international calling rates apply to conversations across the water. Internet connectivity varies dramatically between the two sides, with different providers, regulations, and access levels creating a digital divide that mirrors the political separation. Transportation networks highlight the inefficiencies of separation. The river that should unite these capitals instead creates a bottleneck requiring boats, papers, and patience for what should be routine movement. Aviation provides the surreal situation where flights between these neighboring capitals often require connections through European cities, making a 1.5-kilometer journey into an international odyssey. Yet geography alone cannot explain why these nations remain separate. The Congo River divides them physically, but millions of families, communities, and economic relationships naturally bridge this gap. The daily reality for ordinary people reveals connections that transcend political boundaries. Street vendors speak the same languages, families share the same cultures, and communities face the same challenges regardless of which flag flies over their government buildings. The artificial nature of this division becomes obvious when you realize that the river meant to separate these nations actually demonstrates how connected they remain. But this geographic paradox only scratches the surface of a much deeper wound that continues to shape both nations today. The colonial wound that never healed. Belgium and France approached colonial extraction with such different methods that they created two entirely different forms of trauma across the same river. Belgium turned the eastern Congo into a personal slave plantation, while France established a more bureaucratic corporate extraction system in the Western Territory. Both approaches destroyed local societies, but they did so in ways that continue to shape how each nation functions today. The scars from these different colonial experiences explain why two countries sharing the same river, same cultures, and same resources ended up with such different political and economic systems. The 1884 Berlin Conference created this nightmare through pure European arrogance. German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck hosted European powers in his capital to carve up Africa like a Sunday roast, with absolutely no African representatives present. The Congo River became the boundary between Belgian and French claims simply because it appeared as a clear line on European maps. The conference participants had never set foot in the Congo Basin, never spoke to local leaders, and never considered that communities on both sides of the river had been integrated for centuries. They drew borders based on European convenience, not African reality. King Leopold II of Belgium claimed the Eastern Congo as his personal property, not even as a Belgian colony. The Congo Free State existed as Leopold's private business venture, making him the owner of a territory 75 times larger than Belgium itself. Leopold never visited his African empire, but extracted rubber and ivory through a system of forced labor that killed an estimated 10 to 15 million people. His private army, the Force Publique, terrorized villages into meeting rubber quotas by cutting off hands, taking hostages, and burning entire communities. Meanwhile, France granted corporate concessions to private companies in the Western Congo, creating a different but equally brutal system of exploitation. These different administrative approaches created lasting institutional differences. Leopold's personal dictatorship relied on direct violence and terror to extract resources, leaving no functional government institutions behind. International pressure following the 1904 casement reports documenting these atrocities finally forced Leopold to surrender his personal concession to the Belgian government in 1908. Belgium then had to build colonial administration from scratch in a territory traumatized by decades of systematic brutality. France, however, established bureaucratic colonial structures from the beginning in their Congo territory. French administrators created government offices, legal systems, and educational programs that served colonial interests, but at least provided some institutional framework. Forced labor systems in both territories created different patterns of resistance and collaboration. In the Belgian Congo, communities developed survival strategies focused on hiding from authorities, fleeing to remote areas, and protecting family networks from the constant threat of violence. The memory of severed hands and burned villages created deep suspicion of any centralized authority. French Congo communities faced different pressures through the concession system, where companies controlled specific territories and extracted labor through taxation and debt systems. This created different forms of resistance based on negotiation and legal challenges rather than just survival. Colonial education policies shaped entirely different intellectual classes in each Congo. Belgium deliberately limited education for Congolese people, believing that literacy would create dangerous political consciousness. The few schools that existed focused on basic skills needed for colonial labor, with almost no Congolese students receiving secondary education. At independence in 1960, the Belgian Congo had fewer than 20 university graduates among its 15 million people. France pursued a different strategy, creating small educated elites who could serve colonial administration. French schools in the Congo taught French language, culture, and law, creating a class of intellectuals who understood European political systems but remained disconnected from traditional African governance. Christian missionary approaches differed dramatically between the two territories. Belgian Catholic missions focused on basic evangelization and elementary education, operating under tight government control. These missions emphasized obedience to colonial authority and provided limited literacy training. French missions, both Catholic and Protestant, created more extensive educational networks and produced Congolese clergy who later became political leaders. The different missionary approaches created distinct relationships between Christianity and political authority that persist today. Colonial infrastructure projects served completely different metropolitan interests. Belgium built railways, ports, and mining facilities designed to extract resources as efficiently as possible from the interior to European markets. The infrastructure connected mining areas to export points, but ignored the needs of local communities. France developed different infrastructure in their Congo territory, focusing on administrative centers and transportation networks that served broader West African colonial interests. These different infrastructure patterns created economic foundations that still influence how each country connects to global markets. The timing of independence movements reveals how different colonial experiences shaped political development. The Belgian Congo exploded into independence in 1960 after massive urban riots and rural rebellions forced Belgium to abandon its colony with minimal preparation. Belgium provided no transition period, no training for Congolese administrators, and no plan for post-colonial governance. The country collapsed into civil war within weeks of independence. French Congo experienced a more gradual transition, with Congolese leaders participating in French colonial assemblies and gaining administrative experience before independence in 1960. These colonial legacies continue to influence legal systems, international partnerships, and government structures in 2025. The Democratic Republic of Congo still uses Belgian civil law as its legal foundation, while the Republic of Congo follows French legal traditions. This means that contracts, property rights, and business regulations operate according to different European legal principles, despite the countries sharing the same river. International partnerships still reflect these colonial connections, with the DRC maintaining stronger ties to Belgium and other Flemish-speaking regions, while the ROC participates in French-speaking international organizations. The psychological trauma from different colonial experiences shapes political behavior today. Communities in the DRC approach government with suspicion and fear based on historical memories of violent exploitation. Political authority remains associated with external extraction and local oppression. In the ROC, colonial experiences created different relationships with state power based on negotiation and bureaucratic processes rather than pure survival. These different psychological legacies influence how citizens in each country interact with government, participate in politics, and understand their relationships with international partners. Yet colonial wounds alone cannot explain why these nations remain trapped in cycles of extraction and instability. The answer lies buried beneath their soil and flowing through their forests, where vast mineral wealth continues to attract the same predatory interests that have plagued both Congos for over a century. The resource curse in two different flavors. Both nations possess extraordinary mineral wealth, yet this abundance has created entirely different forms of national trauma. The Democratic Republic of Congo sits on top of 70% of the world's cobalt reserves, while the Republic of Congo floats on massive oil deposits beneath its forests. This single fact explains why these neighboring nations experience completely different types of chaos and stability. The DRC's cobalt feeds the global hunger for electric vehicle batteries and smartphones, creating a scramble for resources that fuels endless conflict across over 1,200 active mining sites controlled by armed groups, according to UN experts. Meanwhile, the ROC's oil wealth has purchased a form of authoritarian stability that keeps the country relatively peaceful but deeply unequal. The Democratic Republic of Congo produced 130,000 tons of cobalt in 2022, representing nearly 68% of the world's total production. This massive output comes from a combination of industrial mining operations and artisanal miners who dig cobalt by hand using basic tools. Children as young as 7 years old work in these mines, crawling through narrow tunnels to extract the blue-gray metal that powers your laptop and electric car. The mining sector accounts for over 60% of the DRC's exports and employs more than 2 million people, making it the backbone of an economy that depends entirely on digging wealth from the ground and shipping it overseas. Artisanal cobalt mining in 2025 remains a humanitarian disaster, hidden behind the clean technology revolution. Miners work without proper safety equipment in pits that collapse regularly, killing workers whose deaths never make international headlines. The cobalt they extract travels through supply chains that connect rural DRC villages to factories in China, then to Tesla and Apple production facilities. International companies have implemented various certification schemes to claim their cobalt comes from conflict-free sources. But these programs often fail to address the fundamental reality that most cobalt mining in the DRC involves dangerous working conditions and child labor. The Republic of Congo's oil-dependent economy creates a completely different dynamic. Oil revenues provide steady government income that doesn't require massive labor forces or dangerous working conditions. The petroleum sector generates billions of dollars annually for a population of just 6 million people, creating per capita resource wealth that dwarfs what most Congolese in the DRC will ever see. This oil wealth has enabled Denis Sassou Nguesso to maintain power for 4 decades by purchasing loyalty through patronage networks and keeping potential opposition movements financially dependent on government contracts. International players have carved up resource extraction rights in both Congos according to their strategic interests. China dominates mining investments in the DRC through massive acquisitions like the 2016 sale of Freeport-McMoRan's Tenkfunga mine to China Molybdenum for $2.68 billion. with $2.48 billion financed through Chinese bank loans. This deal exemplifies how Chinese state-backed companies have systematically acquired control over the DRC's most valuable mineral assets. France maintains significant influence over oil extraction in the ROC through companies like TotalEnergies, while other international oil companies compete for drilling rights in offshore fields. Environmental destruction from resource extraction affects both nations differently, but equally devastatingly. Cobalt and copper mining in the DRC has contaminated water sources, destroyed agricultural land, and created toxic waste sites that will remain dangerous for generations. Communities near mining operations report increased rates of birth defects, respiratory problems, and other health issues linked to heavy metal contamination. The ROC's oil extraction has caused different environmental problems, including offshore drilling accidents, pipeline leaks, and gas flaring that contributes to climate change while providing no benefit to local communities. Resource wealth distribution creates completely different inequality patterns in each Congo. The DRC's mineral wealth benefits a small elite connected to mining contracts, while over 70% of the population lives on under $2.15 per day, according to 2024 World Bank data, directly linking resource plunder to widespread poverty. Even communities living directly on top of cobalt deposits often lack access to clean water, healthcare, or education. The ROC's oil wealth creates a different type of inequality, with petroleum revenues funding urban development projects and government salaries that primarily benefit people connected to the ruling party. International efforts to regulate resource extraction have focused on different challenges in each Congo. The DRC faces intense scrutiny over conflict minerals, with various certification schemes attempting to ensure that cobalt, copper, and other minerals don't fund armed groups or involve child labor. The European Union has imposed sanctions on senior Rwandan and M23 officials, including measures against a gold refinery in Rwanda and 9 Rwanda Defense Force and M23 officials, reflecting international efforts to address how conflict impacts the DRC's resources. Electric vehicle battery demand has intensified international focus on DRC's cobalt mines in ways that create both opportunities and problems. The global transition to electric vehicles requires massive cobalt supplies that only the DRC can provide at current consumption levels. This demand has increased cobalt prices and attracted more international investment to mining operations, but it has also intensified competition for control over mining areas. The M23 rebel group, backed by Rwanda, continues driving conflict in eastern DRC while vying for territory and control over valuable natural resources. The fundamental tragedy remains that both Congos experience the same colonial extraction mentality today, just with different resources and different foreign partners. The resources change, the extracting countries change, but the basic pattern of external actors taking wealth while local populations bear the costs continues across both sides of the Congo River. This economic exploitation has created political systems that serve external interests rather than their own citizens, undermining any possibility of genuine democratic governance to authoritarianism. Both nations have followed remarkably different routes toward the same authoritarian destination. The Democratic Republic of Congo scores poorly on every measure of democratic governance, while the Republic of Congo maintains authoritarian stability through oil wealth and repression. These neighboring countries demonstrate how resource extraction can undermine democratic development through entirely different mechanisms, yet produce similar results where ordinary citizens have minimal influence over their governments. Felix Tshisekedi's 2023 re-election in the Democratic Republic of Congo raised serious questions about electoral legitimacy that opposition parties and international observers continue to challenge. Tshisekedi won with 73% of the vote, but the election process featured irregularities that included voter registration problems, ballot shortages, and counting delays that lasted for days in some areas. Opposition candidate Martin Fayulu claimed widespread fraud and demanded a recount, but the Constitutional Court rejected his appeals without conducting a thorough investigation. International election monitors from the African Union and other organizations noted procedural problems, but stopped short of declaring the election invalid, creating a situation where Tshisekedi's victory remains legally recognized but politically contested. Denis Sassou Nguesso has maintained power in the Republic of Congo for 4 decades through a combination of oil wealth, patronage networks, and strategic repression that makes him one of Africa's longest-serving leaders. Sassou Nguesso first became president in 1979, lost power briefly in the 1990s, then returned through a civil war in 1997, and has remained in office ever since. He changed the constitution in 2015 to remove age limits and extend presidential terms, ensuring his ability to run for re-election indefinitely. His 2021 re-election victory with 88% of the vote surprised no one, given that opposition candidates faced harassment, limited media access, and restrictions on campaign activities that made meaningful competition impossible. The economic foundations of authoritarianism differ dramatically between these nations despite their shared river border. The DRC's GDP per capita reached just $695 in 2023, reflecting how mineral wealth extraction fails to benefit ordinary citizens, even as the economy grew 6.7% that year with projections of 5.6% growth in 2025. However, 56% of the population lives in poverty, with a Gini coefficient of 0.511, demonstrating extreme inequality despite economic expansion. The ROC's smaller population of 6 million people supports higher per capita distribution of oil revenues, achieving a GDP per capita of $2,290 in 2023, which enables more extensive patronage networks and social spending that maintains political stability. Corruption in both nations has evolved into different, but equally destructive systems that serve the interests of ruling elites while impoverishing ordinary citizens. The DRC operates under what experts call kleptocracy, where government officials systematically steal public resources through mining contracts, customs fraud, and budget manipulation. Former President Joseph Kabila's family reportedly accumulated billions of dollars through shell companies and foreign bank accounts, while the country's infrastructure crumbled and public services collapsed. The ROC practices petro-authoritarianism, where oil revenues fund patronage networks that reward loyalty and punish opposition. Government contracts go to companies owned by ruling party members, while public positions are distributed based on political connections rather than qualifications. Civil society movements and opposition parties in both countries face different challenges, but achieve similar limited success in promoting democratic change. The DRC's opposition parties operate in a more open but chaotic environment, where they can organize rallies and publish criticism, but struggle to compete in elections rigged through administrative manipulation and resource advantages. Opposition leader Martin Fayulu has maintained his challenge to Tshisekedi's legitimacy through legal appeals and public protests, but his supporters face arrest and harassment from security forces. The ROC's opposition operates under more direct repression, with opposition politicians facing exile, imprisonment, and restrictions on their movements and communications. International support for democracy differs dramatically between the two Congos based on strategic interests rather than democratic principles. Western governments maintain stronger pressure on the DRC regarding democratic governance because they need political stability to ensure reliable cobalt supplies for electric vehicle batteries and renewable energy technology. The European Union and United States regularly criticize electoral irregularities in the DRC and fund civil society organizations that monitor human rights violations. The ROC faces less international pressure for democratic reforms because its oil wealth and smaller size make it less strategically important, while France maintains cordial relationships with Sassou Nguesso's government that prioritize energy security over democratic governance. Media freedom and internet access are restricted differently in each Congo, but achieve similar results in limiting information flow and political discourse. The DRC maintains a relatively open media environment where journalists can report on government corruption and opposition activities, but reporters face harassment, arrest, and violence when they investigate sensitive topics involving mining contracts or security force abuses. The ROC maintains tighter control over media outlets through licensing requirements and direct government ownership of major newspapers and television stations, while internet access is more widely available but subject to periodic shutdowns during political tensions. The sobering reality remains that neither Congo has achieved the democratic promise of their independence movements from the 1960s. Instead, both nations have developed political systems that prioritize resource extraction and political survival over responsive governance. Yet the consequences of failed democratic governance manifest in dramatically different ways across the Congo River, where the absence of legitimate political institutions creates entirely different forms of instability and conflict. The war economy versus the oil state. These different forms of political failure have created entirely different security environments that shape every aspect of daily life. The eastern provinces of the Democratic Republic of Congo resemble a war zone more than a functioning part of a sovereign nation, while just across the river, the Republic of Congo maintains the kind of stability that allows tourists to visit without bulletproof vests. The DRC's mineral wealth has created perpetual conflict as armed groups fight for control over mining areas, while the ROC's oil revenues have purchased the kind of peace that keeps international investors comfortable and government officials wealthy. The M23 rebellion represents the latest chapter in the DRC's endless cycle of armed conflict, with Rwandan military support turning a domestic insurgency into a regional war. The March 23 movement, named after a failed 2009 peace agreement, controls significant territory in North Kivu province and has repeatedly captured and lost the strategic city of Goma. Rwanda provides weapons, training, and direct military support to M23 fighters, creating a proxy war that serves Rwandan interests in controlling cobalt and copper mining areas. The United Nations has documented extensive evidence of Rwandan involvement, including the presence of Rwandan Defense Force officers commanding M23 units and the supply of advanced weapons systems that local rebels could never obtain independently. Perpetual conflict in the DRC has created a war economy where violence generates profits for armed groups, corrupt officials, and international middlemen who benefit from instability. Armed groups control approximately 120 mining sites across eastern DRC, imposing taxes on miners and selling minerals to international buyers through complex smuggling networks. The Allied Democratic Forces, various Mai groups, and other militias operate like businesses that use violence to maintain market control over cobalt, gold, and copper extraction. This system creates perverse incentives where peace would eliminate profitable opportunities for armed actors who have no interest in stable governance. The Republic of Congo's oil wealth has enabled Denis Sassou Nguesso to purchase internal stability through patronage networks and security investments that prevent the kind of armed challenges that plague the DRC. Oil revenues provide steady government income that doesn't depend on controlling remote mining areas or fighting over extraction sites. Sassou Nguesso can afford to maintain well-equipped security forces, pay government salaries regularly, and fund development projects that keep urban populations relatively satisfied. The absence of easily accessible mineral wealth also means that rebel groups cannot fund themselves through resource extraction, making armed rebellion financially unsustainable. Foreign military interventions operate differently in each Congo based on their distinct security challenges. The United Nations maintains its largest peacekeeping operation in the DRC, with over 12,000 peacekeepers attempting to protect civilians and support government forces against numerous armed groups. The mission costs over $1 billion annually, but struggles to control a territory the size of Western Europe with insufficient resources and unclear mandates. The ROC faces no similar international military presence because its stability doesn't require external peacekeeping, though France maintains military cooperation agreements that could provide rapid intervention if needed. Armed groups in the DRC have transformed mineral-rich areas into informal taxation zones where they collect fees from miners, traders, and transport companies while providing no government services in return. The Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda operates like a state within a state in parts of South Kivu, controlling territory larger than some European countries and generating millions of dollars through mining taxes. These groups have created parallel governance systems where they resolve disputes, provide security, and regulate economic activity in areas where the central government has no effective presence. The humanitarian crisis in the DRC has created over 6 million internally displaced persons who have fled their homes due to conflict, making it one of the world's largest displacement crises. Displacement camps around Goma house hundreds of thousands of people in conditions that lack adequate water, sanitation, and healthcare services. Children born in these camps have never known life outside of emergency humanitarian assistance, creating a generation that has experienced only conflict and displacement. The ROC faces no comparable humanitarian emergency, with its citizens enjoying relative security and access to basic government services. Regional neighbors interact with each Congo based on their stability levels and the opportunities or threats they present. Rwanda supports M23 rebels in the DRC while maintaining normal diplomatic relations with the ROC, reflecting how instability in one Congo creates intervention opportunities for neighboring countries. Uganda has deployed forces in eastern DRC to fight the allied Democratic Forces, but maintains peaceful borders with the ROC. Angola has mediated peace efforts in the DRC while conducting normal trade relationships with the ROC, showing how the same regional powers treat each Congo differently based on their security situations. The presence or absence of active conflict shapes everything from foreign investment decisions to daily life realities in each nation. International companies avoid investing in eastern DRC due to security risks, while the ROC attracts steady foreign investment in its oil sector and urban development projects. Citizens in the DRC's conflict zones cannot plan for the future because violence can disrupt their lives at any moment, while ROC citizens can start businesses, attend universities, and make long-term plans without fear of armed conflict. The fundamental tragedy remains that both Congos possess the natural resources and human capital needed for prosperity, but only one has achieved the basic stability required for development. The DRC's mineral wealth has become a curse that funds violence and attracts predatory actors who benefit from chaos. The ROC's oil wealth has purchased the kind of authoritarian stability that allows economic development while suppressing political freedom. These different security environments have created vastly different economic realities that extend far beyond the immediate costs of conflict. The tale of two economies. Survival versus stability. Economic indicators reveal the stark reality of how resource wealth translates into dramatically different living standards for ordinary citizens. The Democratic Republic of Congo's GDP per capita sits at just $695 in 2023, while the Republic of Congo maintains $2,290 per person. This means that the average citizen in the Republic of Congo has access to more than 3 times the economic resources of someone living just across the river in the DRC. These figures represent more than statistical differences. They reflect entirely different qualities of life, opportunities, and futures for people who share the same cultural heritage and geographic region. The DRC's massive population of 106.55 million people requires enormous investments in infrastructure, healthcare, education, and job creation that strain government resources and overwhelm institutional capacity. Every economic policy must account for enormous numbers of people competing for limited opportunities. The Republic of Congo's 6 million citizens allow for more manageable economic planning, where government resources can potentially reach larger percentages of the population. This population difference means that economic growth in the DRC must be exponentially higher just to maintain current living standards, while the ROC can achieve meaningful improvements with more modest growth rates. Chinese investment patterns in the DRC focus heavily on infrastructure projects tied to mineral extraction agreements that create long-term dependencies while providing immediate construction benefits. China has invested billions of dollars in roads, railways, and mining facilities through loans that use future mineral exports as collateral. These investments create jobs and improve transportation networks, but they also lock the DRC into resource extraction relationships that limit economic diversification. Chinese companies build the infrastructure needed to extract cobalt and copper more efficiently, but they don't establish manufacturing facilities that would add value to these raw materials within the DRC itself. French economic influence in the Republic of Congo operates through different mechanisms that reflect the country's oil wealth and smaller scale. French companies like Total Energies maintain significant investments in offshore oil drilling and petroleum refining facilities that generate steady revenue streams for the government. French banks provide financing for infrastructure projects and business development, while French technical expertise supports government administration and private sector development. This relationship creates economic stability, but also maintains dependency on French markets and technical support that limits independent economic development. Informal economies dominate daily life in the DRC, where over 80% of workers operate outside official employment structures, while the ROC maintains more formal economic systems that provide greater worker protections and government revenue. Street vendors, artisanal miners, and small-scale farmers in the DRC work without contracts, social security, or legal protections because the formal economy cannot provide sufficient employment opportunities. This informal sector generates real economic activity, but remains invisible to government taxation and regulation systems. The ROC's smaller population and oil revenues enable more formal employment relationships where workers receive regular salaries, benefits, and legal protections that create more stable economic conditions. Unemployment rates among young people exceed 80% in some DRC regions, creating massive social pressures and limited economic prospects for the majority of the population under 25 years old. Young people in the DRC often turn to artisanal mining, street trading, or migration to survive economically, but these activities provide subsistence rather than pathways to economic advancement. The ROC's youth face better employment prospects through government jobs, oil sector positions, and service industries that serve the country's more stable economy. Currency systems create different economic stability patterns that affect everything from daily purchasing power to international trade relationships. The DRC uses the Congolese franc, which fluctuates based on political instability, conflict levels, and international confidence in the government. This currency instability makes long-term economic planning difficult and creates inflation pressures that hurt ordinary citizens. The ROC uses the Central African CFA franc, which is pegged to the euro and provides greater price stability. However, this currency arrangement also limits the ROC's ability to conduct independent monetary policy and maintains economic ties to France that some critics view as neo-colonial control. Agricultural productivity differs dramatically between the two countries despite similar climate conditions and soil quality. The DRC's agricultural sector accounts for 44.2% of GDP, but operates primarily through subsistence farming with limited mechanization, fertilizer use, or market access. Conflict in eastern provinces disrupts agricultural production and forces farmers to abandon their fields, contributing to food insecurity that affects millions of people. The ROC maintains more stable agricultural production with better access to markets and government support. International debt burdens create different constraints on economic policy in each Congo. The World Bank's portfolio in the DRC totaled $7.339 billion as of September 2024, with projects focused on governance, human capital development, and infrastructure. These loans provide needed resources, but also create debt service obligations that limit government spending flexibility. The ROC maintains different lending relationships that reflect its oil wealth and smaller borrowing needs. Economic inequality within each country creates different social tensions and political pressures that shape government policies and social stability. The DRC's extreme inequality combines with absolute poverty to create conditions where most citizens struggle for basic survival, while small elites control mineral wealth and government resources. The ROC's inequality operates at higher absolute income levels, where oil wealth benefits urban elites while rural populations remain poor but not desperate. These economic disparities become most visible through the basic infrastructure that determines whether citizens can access markets, schools, hospitals, and opportunities for advancement. The foundation of any functioning economy depends on roads, power, grids, and communication networks that connect people to possibilities, connecting versus surviving. In both nations, this infrastructure reality shapes every aspect of human development and economic opportunity. The Democratic Republic of Congo covers 2.3 million square kilometers, but has fewer paved roads than Rwanda, a country smaller than the state of Maryland. This shocking statistic reveals the fundamental infrastructure crisis that separates these neighboring nations. While Rwanda has invested heavily in road networks, telecommunications, and power generation since the 1990s, the DRC struggles to maintain basic transportation links between its major cities. The contrast becomes even more striking when you consider that the DRC possesses vast mineral wealth that should fund infrastructure development, yet its citizens often walk for hours to reach the nearest paved road. Current infrastructure projects in both countries reveal completely different development priorities and financial capabilities. The DRC focuses on emergency repairs and basic connectivity projects, often funded by international donors who demand specific outcomes before releasing funds. The government recently completed a section of the Kinshasa-Matadi highway with Chinese financing, but this single road project took over a decade to finish due to funding interruptions and political instability. The Republic of Congo pursues more ambitious infrastructure development, including the construction of a new international airport in Brazzaville and expansion of the port facilities at Pointe Noire. These projects reflect the ROC's ability to use oil revenues for long-term planning rather than crisis management. Transportation networks in both Congos demonstrate how geography becomes destiny when combined with different economic resources. The DRC relies heavily on river transport because its road network cannot handle the massive distances between population centers. The Congo River serves as the primary highway for moving goods and people across the country, but this system operates with aging boats, irregular schedules, and frequent accidents that highlight the absence of modern alternatives. The ROC maintains better road connections between its major cities, though the country still depends on river transport for reaching remote areas. The difference lies in the ROC's ability to maintain both systems simultaneously rather than choosing between them. Telecommunications infrastructure creates a digital divide that mirrors the broader economic disparities between these nations. The DRC's mobile phone coverage reaches only 85% of the population, with rural areas often lacking reliable service due to inadequate tower infrastructure and frequent power outages. Internet penetration remains below 20%, limiting access to digital services and economic opportunities that require online connectivity. The ROC achieved nearly universal mobile coverage and maintains internet penetration rates above 45%, enabling its citizens to participate in digital economies and access information services that remain unavailable to most Congolese across the river. Power generation and electrical grid development reveal perhaps the most dramatic infrastructure differences between these neighboring countries. The DRC generates less than 3,000 megawatts of electricity for its 106.55 million people, creating one of the world's lowest per capita electricity consumption rates. The country possesses enormous hydroelectric potential through the Congo River system, but lacks the investment and technical expertise needed to develop these resources. Kinshasa experiences regular blackouts that disrupt businesses and force residents to rely on expensive diesel generators for basic lighting. The ROC generates sufficient electricity for its smaller population through oil-fired power plants and hydroelectric facilities, maintaining more reliable power supplies that enable industrial development and urban growth. Water and sanitation infrastructure demonstrates how basic human needs become luxury services when governments cannot provide essential infrastructure. Only 52% of DRC's population has access to clean drinking water, with urban areas experiencing frequent water shortages due to inadequate treatment facilities and aging distribution systems. Rural communities often rely on untreated river water that causes preventable diseases and contributes to child mortality rates that remain among the world's highest. The ROC provides clean water access to approximately 80% of its population, with urban areas maintaining reliable water supplies and sanitation systems that support public health and economic development. Healthcare infrastructure reflects the broader pattern of infrastructure inequality that affects every aspect of daily life in both countries. The DRC operates fewer than 10,000 health facilities for its massive population, creating doctor-to-patient ratios that make quality healthcare impossible for most citizens. Many rural areas lack any medical facilities within walking distance, forcing sick patients to travel for hours to reach basic treatment. The ROC maintains a more adequate healthcare system with better equipped hospitals and higher doctor-to-patient ratios, though the country still struggles to provide specialized medical services without sending patients overseas. Educational infrastructure determines future economic prospects for entire generations, creating different opportunities for children born on opposite sides of the Congo River. The DRC's education system operates with massive overcrowding, inadequate teacher training, and frequent strikes that disrupt academic calendars. Many schools lack basic amenities like desks, books, and functioning toilets, forcing students to learn in conditions that would be considered unacceptable anywhere else. The ROC maintains smaller class sizes and better school facilities, though the country still faces challenges in providing quality education to rural communities. The infrastructure divide between these nations demonstrates how initial advantages compound over time through positive feedback loops. The ROC's oil wealth enabled infrastructure investments that attracted more foreign investment, generated more government revenue, and funded additional infrastructure development. The DRC's infrastructure deficits created negative feedback loops where poor services discouraged investment, reduced government revenue, and prevented the accumulation of resources needed for infrastructure improvements. These divergent paths show how infrastructure becomes both a cause and consequence of economic development, creating lasting advantages for nations that achieve basic connectivity while trapping others in cycles of underdevelopment. Yet infrastructure challenges pale in comparison to the demographic pressures that threaten to overwhelm one of these nations while barely affecting the other. The numbers reveal a looming crisis that could reshape the entire Central African region within a single generation. The population explosion versus the manageable state. Population dynamics create fundamentally different challenges that will determine each nation's trajectory over the next generation. The Democratic Republic of Congo faces a demographic time bomb that could reshape the entire region within the next 25 years. Current population estimates place the DRC at 106.55 million people in 2025, but demographic projections suggest this number could nearly double to 200 million by 2050. This explosive growth rate creates pressures that would challenge any government, but for a nation already struggling with basic service delivery, the implications are staggering. Meanwhile, the Republic of Congo maintains a more manageable population of approximately 6 million citizens that grows at sustainable rates, creating entirely different demographic dynamics that shape everything from economic policy to social stability. Rapid population growth in the DRC creates cascading pressures that the ROC simply doesn't experience due to its smaller demographic scale. Every year, the DRC adds roughly 3 million new people who need jobs, healthcare, education, and housing in a country that already cannot provide these services to its existing population. This growth rate means that even if the economy expanded dramatically, the benefits would be diluted across an ever-increasing number of people. The ROC's modest population growth allows government resources and economic development to potentially improve living standards for existing citizens rather than merely keeping pace with demographic expansion. Kinshasa exemplifies the urbanization crisis that accompanies explosive population growth in developing nations. The city has grown from 2 million people in 1980 to over 17 million today, making it one of the fastest-growing urban areas in the world. This growth occurs without corresponding investments in infrastructure, creating massive slums where millions of people live without access to clean water, electricity, or sanitation services. Streets designed for hundreds of thousands of residents now handle millions of daily commuters, creating traffic jams that can last for hours and economic losses that compound the city's development challenges. Brazzaville, with its 2.4 million residents, remains far more manageable in scale, allowing city planners to actually plan rather than simply react to crisis after crisis. Youth demographics reveal the most significant long-term challenge facing both nations, but with dramatically different implications. Over 60% of the DRC's population is under 25 years old, creating an enormous cohort of young people who will need jobs, education, and opportunities in the coming decades. This demographic bulge could drive economic growth if properly educated and employed, but it could also fuel social instability if these millions of young people cannot find meaningful work. The ROC faces similar youth demographics, but on a scale that makes individual attention and targeted programs more feasible than mass solutions required in the DRC. Healthcare systems demonstrate how population size determines the feasibility of public service delivery in developing nations. The DRC operates fewer than 10,000 health facilities for its 106.55 million people, creating doctor-to-patient ratios that make quality healthcare impossible for most citizens. The country's human capital index of 0.37 reflects how low child survival rates, high child stunting, and inadequate healthcare limit human development potential. The ROC maintains better healthcare infrastructure relative to its population size, though both countries struggle with challenges like disease outbreaks and vaccine hesitancy that reflect broader governance problems. Educational systems reveal the most tragic consequences of population growth without corresponding investment in human development. The DRC's primary level completion rate of only 75% means that millions of children never finish elementary school, while an estimated 97% of 10-year-olds cannot read and understand simple text. These educational deficits create a generation that cannot participate effectively in modern economies, perpetuating poverty and limiting the country's development potential. The ROC's smaller population allows for better teacher-to-student ratios and more effective educational programs, though both countries face challenges in providing quality education to rural communities. Economic implications of different population sizes create entirely different development challenges and opportunities. The DRC's GDP per capita of $695 reflects not just limited economic activity, but also the division of national wealth among an enormous population. Even significant economic growth must be shared among so many people that individual improvements remain minimal. The ROC's smaller population means that oil revenues and economic development can potentially provide more substantial benefits per person, though inequality and corruption limit the actual distribution of these benefits. Environmental pressures from population growth affect both countries, but create different types of challenges based on their demographic scales. The DRC's growing population increases pressure on agricultural land, leading to deforestation as farmers clear forests to feed expanding communities. The country's deforestation rates reflect not just commercial logging, but also subsistence farming by millions of people who have no alternative sources of food or income. The ROC experiences similar environmental pressures, but at levels that allow for more sustainable management practices. These demographic trajectories will reshape both countries' futures and regional influence in ways that are already becoming apparent. The DRC's population growth will make it increasingly dominant in regional affairs simply through demographic weight, but this influence will be undermined if the country cannot provide basic services to its growing population. The ROC's stable demographics may allow for more sustainable development based on effective governance rather than sheer population size. Yet both nations face mounting environmental pressures that transcend demographic differences, creating shared challenges that neither population size nor oil wealth can easily solve. The climate crisis. Same river, different responses. Climate change transforms these demographic and infrastructure challenges into existential threats that neither nation can address through domestic policies alone. The Congo River system doesn't recognize political boundaries when floods devastate communities, or when droughts reduce water levels that both nations depend on for transportation and hydroelectric power. Rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns impact the entire basin ecosystem, but the Democratic Republic of Congo and Republic of Congo face these challenges with dramatically different resources and capabilities. Deforestation rates in both countries reflect their different economic pressures and governance capacities. The DRC loses approximately 1.2 million hectares of forest annually, making it one of the world's fastest deforestation rates. This destruction occurs primarily through small-scale agriculture as millions of people clear forests to grow food for survival, though commercial logging and mining operations also contribute significantly. Families with no alternative income sources burn trees to produce charcoal for urban markets, creating a cycle where environmental destruction becomes an economic necessity. The ROC experiences slower deforestation rates due to its smaller population and oil wealth that provides alternative economic opportunities, though the country still faces pressure from logging companies and agricultural expansion. Climate adaptation. Strategies differ dramatically based on each nation's institutional capacity and financial resources. The DRC struggles to implement even basic adaptation measures because the government lacks the resources and administrative capacity needed for effective environmental planning. Most adaptation occurs at the community level, where rural villages develop local strategies for dealing with changing weather patterns without government support or technical expertise. The ROC has developed more comprehensive adaptation plans with international support, including coastal protection projects and agricultural programs designed to help farmers adjust to changing rainfall patterns. Changing rainfall patterns create food security challenges that affect both nations, but with different severity levels. The DRC's agricultural sector, which employs over 60% of the population, faces increasing unpredictability in seasonal rains that disrupts planting and harvesting cycles. Farmers who depend on rain-fed agriculture often lose entire crops when rains arrive too late or too early, creating food shortages that affect millions of people. The ROC's smaller agricultural sector and food import capacity provide more resilience against climate-related food disruptions, though rural communities still experience challenges when traditional farming methods no longer work effectively. Environmental degradation from resource extraction creates different types of climate challenges in each country. Mining operations in the DRC release heavy metals and chemicals that contaminate water sources and soil, while also destroying vegetation that would normally absorb carbon dioxide and prevent erosion. Open-pit mining removes entire forest ecosystems, creating bare landscapes that contribute to local temperature increases and reduced biodiversity. Oil extraction in the ROC generates different environmental problems, including gas flaring that releases greenhouse gases and offshore drilling that risks marine ecosystem damage from spills or accidents. International climate finance and green development initiatives target each country differently based on their perceived importance and absorption capacity. The DRC receives significant climate funding through programs focused on forest conservation and sustainable development, though much of this money never reaches local communities due to corruption and administrative inefficiencies. International organizations view the DRC's forests as crucial for global carbon sequestration, creating programs that pay for forest protection while sometimes ignoring the needs of people who depend on these forests for survival. The ROC receives less climate finance, but can more effectively implement projects due to better governance structures and smaller-scale challenges. Environmental migration and displacement affect both nations differently based on their existing population pressures and capacity to absorb climate refugees. The DRC already hosts millions of internally displaced persons from armed conflicts, making it difficult to distinguish between climate-related displacement and conflict-driven migration. Droughts in rural areas force farmers to migrate to cities or mining areas, adding to urban population pressures that strain already inadequate infrastructure. The ROC experiences less dramatic climate migration, but faces challenges when environmental refugees from neighboring countries seek safety in its more stable territory. Renewable energy potential varies dramatically between the two countries based on their different resource endowments and development priorities. The DRC possesses enormous hydroelectric potential through the Congo River system, with estimates suggesting the country could generate enough electricity to power much of Africa. However, the technical expertise, financing, and political stability needed for large-scale hydroelectric development remain beyond the country's current capabilities. The ROC has developed some renewable energy projects, but continues to rely primarily on oil-fired power generation that contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. Cross-border environmental challenges require coordination between both governments, but their different priorities and capabilities often prevent effective cooperation. Air pollution from mining operations in the DRC affects air quality in border regions of the ROC, while deforestation in one country affects regional climate patterns that impact both nations. River pollution from industrial activities flows across borders, creating shared environmental problems that require joint solutions. These environmental realities demonstrate how both Congos remain vulnerable to forces beyond their control, whether climate change or the strategic calculations of distant capitals that view Central Africa through the lens of global competition rather than local needs. Pawns in global power. External powers orchestrate policies in both nations with remarkable precision, treating the Congos as strategic assets rather than sovereign states. The Democratic Republic of Congo's massive cobalt reserves make it a crucial player in the global transition to electric vehicles and renewable energy, attracting intense competition between China and Western nations who need these minerals for their green technology ambitions. The Republic of Congo's oil wealth creates different but equally intense international competition, with France maintaining traditional influence while other powers seek opportunities in the petroleum sector. Both nations find themselves pulled in different directions by external actors who view them primarily as sources of raw materials rather than countries with their own development priorities. China's Belt and Road Initiative has fundamentally transformed the DRC's international relationships through massive infrastructure investments tied to mineral extraction agreements. Chinese companies have invested billions of dollars in roads, railways, and mining facilities that serve dual purposes of extracting cobalt and copper while providing needed infrastructure development. In 2016, China Molybdenum Company acquired the Tenkfungira mine from US-based Freeport-McMoRan for $2.68 billion, with Chinese state-owned banks providing $2.48 billion of the financing. This acquisition gave China control over one of the world's most valuable copper and cobalt assets, demonstrating how Chinese financial power translates into strategic resource control. The Belt and Road Initiative creates long-term dependencies where the DRC must repay Chinese loans through future mineral exports, effectively mortgaging the country's natural resources to fund current development projects. Traditional French influence in the Republic of Congo operates through different mechanisms that reflect France's historical colonial relationships and ongoing economic interests. French companies like Total Energies maintain significant investments in ROC's oil sector, while French banks provide financing for government projects and private sector development. This relationship creates economic stability for the ROC, but also maintains dependency on French markets and technical expertise. France's approach emphasizes maintaining stable relationships with authoritarian leaders like Denis Sassou Nguesso, prioritizing energy security and regional stability over democratic governance or human rights concerns. The United States and European Union engage with each Congo differently based on their strategic priorities and historical relationships. The US has been consistently outmaneuvered by China in the DRC due to China's coordinated government-to-government engagement and willingness to provide financing without demanding governance reforms. American companies struggle to compete with Chinese state-backed enterprises that can offer comprehensive financing packages for infrastructure and mining projects. The European Union has imposed sanctions on senior Rwandan and M23 officials, including Rwandan Special Forces Commander and M23 President Bertrand Bisimwa. reflecting European concerns about regional stability and conflict minerals. These sanctions demonstrate how Western powers attempt to influence DRC politics through punitive measures rather than positive incentives. International aid and development assistance flows to each nation reflect their different strategic importance and absorption capacity. The DRC receives massive humanitarian aid due to its ongoing conflicts and humanitarian crises, with billions of dollars flowing through international organizations and non-governmental organizations. However, much of this aid addresses emergency needs rather than long-term development, creating dependency cycles where the country requires constant external support to maintain basic services. The ROC receives less humanitarian assistance, but attracts more development financing for infrastructure projects and economic diversification programs. UN peacekeeping and international intervention approaches vary dramatically between the countries based on their security situations and strategic importance. The United Nations maintains its largest peacekeeping operation in the DRC, with over 12,000 peacekeepers attempting to protect civilians and support government forces against numerous armed groups. This mission costs over $1 billion annually, but struggles to achieve lasting peace due to the complexity of conflicts and limited mandate authority. The ROC faces no similar international military intervention because its oil wealth has purchased internal stability that doesn't require external peacekeeping forces. Regional African organizations like the African Union engage with both Congos based on their stability levels and influence within continental politics. The African Union has mediated peace efforts in the DRC while maintaining diplomatic relationships with both countries, but the organization's limited resources and consensus-based decision-making process restrict its effectiveness in addressing complex conflicts. The DRC's large population and strategic location make it influential in African Union politics, but ongoing conflicts undermine its ability to provide regional leadership. International business and investment communities view the risk-reward calculations differently for each Congo based on their political stability and resource potential. The DRC attracts mining companies willing to accept security risks and regulatory uncertainty in exchange for access to world-class cobalt and copper deposits. However, many international businesses avoid the DRC due to corruption, conflict, and infrastructure challenges that make profitable operations extremely difficult. The ROC attracts steadier foreign investment in its oil sector and urban development projects because the country's political stability and smaller scale make business planning more predictable. Both Congos remain subject to external interests that consistently override local needs and aspirations, creating situations where international competition determines national policies more than domestic priorities. The DRC's mineral wealth attracts international actors who prioritize resource extraction over sustainable development, while the ROC's oil revenues create relationships with foreign powers who support authoritarian stability over democratic governance. Neither country has achieved the sovereignty needed to pursue independent development strategies that serve their citizens' interests rather than external actors' strategic objectives. This raises fundamental questions about whether their current separation actually serves anyone other than the foreign powers who benefit from keeping them divided and weak. The future question: one Congo or forever two? These geopolitical calculations suggest that meaningful change requires examining the forces that created and maintain this division in the first place. Could the two Congos ever reunite into a single nation that serves their shared interests better than the current divided system? This question haunts discussions about Central African development, but the answer reveals uncomfortable truths about how artificial divisions serve powerful interests more than natural unity serves ordinary people. The prospect of reunification faces no legal barriers, but numerous political, economic, and international factors make it extremely unlikely. The national identities of both countries have evolved considerably since the Kingdom of Congo was divided by colonial powers, creating distinct political cultures that complicate any merger discussions. Citizens in the Republic of Congo express concerns about inheriting the DRC's conflicts, economic instability, and governance challenges. Many ROC citizens worry that reunification would mean absorbing millions of refugees from eastern DRC conflicts, while losing their relative prosperity and stability. Current cross-border cooperation initiatives demonstrate both the potential for integration and the obstacles that prevent it. The long-promised bridge connecting Kinshasa and Brazzaville represents the most visible symbol of potential cooperation, but construction delays and funding problems reveal the practical challenges of coordinating projects between two separate governments. Trade relationships between the capitals operate through informal networks that bypass official customs procedures, showing how economic integration happens naturally despite political separation. However, these cooperative efforts remain limited to specific projects rather than comprehensive integration strategies. Different political systems and economic structures would create enormous complications for any merger attempt. The Democratic Republic of Congo operates under a presidential system with decentralized provinces, while the Republic of Congo maintains a more centralized government structure. These different governance models would require constitutional negotiations that could take years to resolve. Economic integration would prove even more challenging, given that the DRC uses the Congolese franc, while the ROC uses the CFA franc tied to the euro. Merging these different monetary systems would require complex negotiations with international partners, particularly France, which maintains significant influence over CFA franc policies. The power imbalance between the two nations would make reunification effectively mean the DRC absorbing the ROC as a subordinate state, creating resistance among ROC political elites who would lose their current advantages. The DRC's population of 106.55 million people, compared to the ROC's 6 million, creates a demographic reality where any unified government would be dominated by DRC interests. ROC leaders understand that merger would eliminate their current authority and reduce them to provincial administrators in a much larger political system. International interests would likely oppose reunification efforts because the current division serves the strategic needs of major powers better than unity would. China benefits from separate relationships with each Congo that allow different approaches to resource extraction and infrastructure development. The US has historically been outmaneuvered by China in the DRC, primarily due to China's strategic deployment of financing and coordinated government-to-government engagement. France maintains traditional influence in the ROC through oil partnerships and would likely resist any reunification that threatened these relationships. Shared challenges like climate change and regional security create pressures that could potentially force closer cooperation between both nations. The Congo River basin faces environmental threats that require coordinated responses from both governments, including deforestation, pollution, and climate change impacts that cross political boundaries. The signing of a peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda on June 27, 2025, under US auspices, aims to normalize relations and ease tensions in eastern DRC and the Great Lakes region, but implementation challenges remain significant. Cultural and linguistic similarities could facilitate integration, but political barriers outweigh these advantages. Both countries share Lingala as a common language, and families maintain connections across the river despite political separation. Religious practices, cultural traditions, and social structures remain similar between both nations, creating natural foundations for integration. However, decades of separate political development have created different institutions, legal systems, and governance practices that would require extensive harmonization. Alternative models of cooperation short of full reunification could provide benefits without the complications of political merger. Economic integration through customs unions, shared infrastructure projects, and coordinated resource management could improve living standards in both countries without requiring political unification. Joint environmental protection initiatives, coordinated education programs, and shared healthcare systems could address common challenges while maintaining separate political structures. The status quo of two separate Congos serves too many powerful interests to change easily, despite the potential benefits of reunification for ordinary citizens. Political leaders in both countries benefit from maintaining separate power structures that provide them with authority and resources they might lose in a unified system. International actors prefer dealing with separate governments that can be played against each other, rather than a unified Congo that might have more negotiating power. Resource extraction companies benefit from separate regulatory systems that allow them to choose the most favorable investment environments. A potential unification could send ripples across the globe, with numerous stakeholders having vested interests in maintaining current supply chains, established relationships with governments, and strategic deals regarding resources and weaponry. For these reasons, the idea of reunification has never been seriously suggested, and there is no mainstream appeal or grassroots movement behind it. The new bridge between the two capitals could symbolize closer ties and pave the way for increased cross-border trade and joint energy projects. But full reunification remains unlikely given the complex interests that benefit from continued separation. The fundamental question becomes whether this division actually serves anyone beyond those who profit from weakness and fragmentation. Understanding these two nations reveals how colonialism's legacy persists through modern resource extraction that prioritizes global supply chains over local development. Both Congos remain trapped by the same forces that divided them over a century ago: external exploitation and internal corruption that serves distant capitals rather than local communities. The Democratic Republic of Congo's cobalt feeds your smartphone, while its people dig by hand in collapsing mines for subsistence wages. The Republic of Congo's oil wealth purchases authoritarian stability, while ordinary citizens see minimal benefits from petroleum revenues that should fund national development. Every electric car battery and smartphone connects you to this ongoing struggle between global demand and local suffering. The question isn't whether these countries will reunite, but whether they'll ever truly control their own destinies in a world that values their resources more than their people.